The 2022 wide receiver draft class is entering their third year. We know what that means. Third year breakout. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, George Pickens, and Drake London. We are talking to you. We discuss the fantasy outlook for wide receivers entering their third season on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. No, I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today, we're going to talk about third-year wide receivers because I guess nowadays, right, wide receivers are breaking out as a rookie in second year. So we don't have to wait for the third year like we did maybe a decade ago. It's really starting. They're starting to break out faster here. But even this 2022 class hasn't fully broken out yet, right? We have those top guys with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, and then the next year with the Drake Londons and the George Pickens, and then some lower guys such as like Khalil Shakir and, maybe Wan'Dale Robinson or Treylon Burks, like a bunch of guys that are Jamison Williams that have disappointed so far. But so none of these guys have fully, I think, taken off to their highest capability. So let's start at the top two here. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. Garrett Wilson hopefully has his new quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. He's wide receiver 11 right now in cost, wide receiver 39 average in fantasy points per game last year. We've talked a lot about him this offseason, but with their new additions, now we know they have Mike Williams. They have Malachi Corley, who they took early in the third round. How are you feeling about Garrett Wilson this year? Do you feel like he can get those 160 targets again in this offense?
I guess we have to reset it back to the hype of 2023, and this is kind of happening with the Jets overall. They did go and invest a little bit more in their offense. They got two offensive tackles, older guys in free agency, drafted one, added Corley, added Mike Williams. So there's a lot of things going on with the Jets trying to make their passing game better. The biggest thing, however, for Garrett Wilson's value is Aaron Rodgers being on the field. Now, there's some hope if he goes down, right? Tyrod Taylor has a big arm and he can get it to Garrett Wilson, probably a little bit better than Zach Wilson was. So there's that. So it's not as hopeless. It's not going to be as boom or bust that you lose the quarterback, Garrett Wilson's value plummets. Like there's a little bit more that you can put your hat on here, and even in the future, maybe if Jordan Travis kind of gets healthy. So all kinds of good vibes with Garrett Wilson, but you just have to be careful about overdrafting him. I think this offseason, it was okay for the Jets, but it's still very good for Garrett Wilson because I think a lot of this offense is going to go through Garrett Wilson. And Breece Hall, and I don't think that's going to change too much. So I think wide receiver 11 might seem aggressive, but it's actually down from where we hyped him last year going in with Rodgers.
Yeah, and I brought this note up earlier in the offseason, but I just want to repeat it. So Wilson's 12.5 points per game this last year. This is in full PPR, or the fewest by any player in a season with 160 plus targets since targets have been tracked in the NFL. That's how far back you have to go. Like, this is an historically bad fantasy year for someone who got that many targets. The last guy to have 150 plus targets and score fewer than Garrett Wilson was DeAndre Hopkins back in 2016 playing with Brock Osweiler. That very next year, he put up then 21 points per game. He almost doubled his numbers, right? That's when he got Deshaun Watson. He only played with him for a handful of games, but still the quarterbacks were better than Brock Osweiler. So I do expect Garrett Wilson to be better. And I like that they added weapons last year. Garrett Wilson was double teamed on 162 receiving snaps, by far the most in the NFL last season. So Mike Williams being there, Malachi Corley being there, that should hopefully help him not be double covered as much. And obviously Aaron Rodgers coming there is huge. So I mean, Garrett Wilson feels like right now a really solid pick in the first round, right? But would you rather Garrett Wilson or go with Chris Olave, who's shown a little bit more consistency in his career? Now, he's had better quarterbacks, right? Derek Carr is still a much better quarterback than anything that Garrett Wilson has seen. What were your feelings on Chris Olave's fantasy season last year? Because he was very much up and down, but towards the second half of the year, he really started to come out.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was he was getting the catches and yards, but he wasn't scoring too much. And there was some inconsistency because Derek Carr was still getting used to him. And part of it was also a lot of Rashid Shaheed love, like for some big plays. He had some blow-up games there, and Chris Olave was more of the solid receiver. He was open all over the field. He didn't necessarily explode, but we saw that later in the season. The light went on. They have a new offense that are breaking in now, so I do like it here. And there's not much competition. There's Shaheed. They went out and got Cedric Wilson, who was doing nothing for the Dolphins. They have A.T. Perry and Equinemius St. Brown, and my favorite rookie name, Bub Means. So this is what they have on the depth chart. There's not a lot. And this offense should say, we're going to channel a lot through Olave. So I'm excited about it. I think you'll see it build from the stretch of last season, Carr and Olave. So it's hard to say. I think I would say Wilson is just a better player, and I would think Rodgers is a better quarterback than Carr. So I think that's where I would lean here, but it's pretty close. I think Olave might be the better value if you can get him in that wide receiver 18 to 20 range versus Garrett Wilson. You're probably going to have to do wide receiver 10 to 12.
Yeah, Olave might be being overlooked right now. I think Derek Carr kind of brings him down a bit in everyone's mind, right? That first half of the season, Carr and Olave did not have the connections. I mean, how many times did we just see them off page? Like it was like so weird, and Carr was getting frustrated and Olave was getting frustrated. But in the second half of the season, they did figure it out. I will say Olave's targets went down by 2 targets per game from weeks 1 through 9. He was averaging over about 9.5 targets per game. Weeks 10 through 18, it went down to 7.6. However, his receptions per game stayed almost identical because his catch percentage went up by 10% in the second half. They were starting to click. His yards per reception went up to 15 instead of, it was down to 11.3 the first half of the season. It went up to 15 yards per reception.
Yeah.
They started to figure it out. They're hitting him down the field more often. His fantasy points increased like crazy over the second half of the season. It went from 10.3 per game in half PPR to 13.5. Like, I think Olave is a really solid pick as well. I don't think he has the upside that Garrett Wilson has, so that's why I'd stick with Wilson. But let me ask you, would you rather Chris Olave or Marvin Harrison Jr.?
That's a good question. We're throwing yet another Ohio State wide receiver into this mix, and it's hard to say. I think I can trust Marvin Harrison just dominating the targets. The Shaheed thing bothers me a little bit with the Saints, but I think it's pretty close. I think all three of these guys could be very close in the scoring, and all of them could easily end up in the top 12, 15. So it's very close, but I would go Marvin Harrison only because I think he's the most talented and he's going to get the highest volume. So that's where I would go. It's pretty close between even him and Wilson, I will say. But I would say Wilson, if Rodgers is healthy, he's going to have a big year.
Yeah. And I think the big thing that you just brought up with Shaheed, it's interesting to look at the touchdowns coming from the Saints last year, the receiving touchdowns. So Olave had 5, and that did co-lead the team. Like he was tied with Shaheed with 5. But then you also had Juwan Johnson with 4, and A.T. Perry with 4, and Jimmy Graham with 4. Like they really, I mean, Derek Carr really spread out those touchdowns. You would like to see more of those not go to, a Jimmy Graham type or an A.T. Perry type. Like you want Chris Olave to dominate more in that area, and hopefully that can happen this year. One more question for you, because Davante Adams does dominate the touchdowns, right? And most of the time in his career. So Davante Adams or Chris Olave, because they're going pretty much back to back right now in drafts.
Yeah, I'm going with Chris Olave. I mean, there's just more upside. Adams is getting up there. The Raiders just put out a statement that they're thrilled with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. I'm not. So I'm going to say Derek Carr at least is established there as a guy that we know is going to feed Olave the ball.
Yeah, I agree with you. We have some tougher discussions to have in our next segment with Drake London and George Pickens, because those two have been highly, highly inconsistent for fantasy over their first 2 years. We've seen some huge games. We've seen some real stinkers where they disappear, but both of them have new quarterbacks this year. So things could really change for them. And I have high expectations for both of these guys. So we'll hop into that discussion right after we hear from a couple of our sponsors.
Absolutely. Should be fun. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views for multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to lend to your entire portfolio with confidence. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising costs of inflation, to pay off your debt, your mortgage, pretty much anything standing your way. With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking to get that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're your number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage account for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look back in your wealth in its entirety. For comprehensive financial news analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor. That's yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination for you. yahoofinance.com, yahoofinance.com.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Drake London with Desmond Ridder was a big no-no, and Taylor Heineke and Marcus Mariota, right? He's been playing with some really bad quarterbacks. Right now, he's going as a wide receiver 25 in drafts, wide receiver 48 in average points per game last year among wide receivers. Not great. I will say he led the team significantly in target percentage at 22%. That's a solid percent. But the thing is, the Falcons never ever passed the ball. So it was still only 110 targets, and he had 2 receiving touchdowns. Now that was tied for the most on the Falcons among wide receivers, I should say. Scotty Miller also had 2 among the wide receivers. Bijan Robinson, the running back, led the team in receiving touchdowns with 4. Like, just a brutal year. Now, obviously, they bring in Kirk Cousins, so we expect Drake London to be much better. Do you think he can be a top 10 guy? Does he have that ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget he was the first wide receiver drafted in this class of 2022, and it might be surprising looking back, and he just ended up in a really bad situation. I mean, it was now better for Garrett Wilson. Chris Olave, it took some time, right? It wasn't great for their quarterback situations as well. Now you've had London, he's waited. Now he gets Kirk Cousins, and this changes everything. Not only that, this offense, and unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about where this offense went in a moment to Pittsburgh. But in Atlanta, we're looking at this Ram style of offense. It really helps the number one receiver all over the field, and he's it. And he's going to separate a little bit more from the checkdowns to get to Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson. He's going to be finally treated like the alpha receiver he deserves to be. And we've seen flashes of this kid. He can be really good, and there's no way he should be scoring 2 touchdowns with that frame of his and going up and getting the ball. Like Kirk Cousins, what I want him to do is treat him like a combination of Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Go look at Jefferson and see him down the field. I want to see some of that from London, but I also want to see some of that Cousins Thielen love where he's throwing to him using the big target in the middle of the field in the red zone. So I'm really excited. Let's hope Cousins and his Achilles is fine. If not, we know the future is also not bad with Michael Penix, and a guy that has a big arm can throw the ball down to him. So I do like it. I mean, in Dynasty, I think you can have a little bit more hope for Drake London. In redraft, I think right now, wide receiver 25, that's a big jump. That's 23 spots, but I'm excited to see what he can do.
Yeah, I mean, Kirk Cousins is going to throw touchdowns. Even last year at 18 and half a season, right? Like he was on pace to have another 30 plus touchdown year, if not 35. But in 2022, 29, and 2021, 33, and 2020, 35 passing touchdowns. Like he's going to throw around 30 if he's healthy and he's there. And we've seen now year after year after year, wide receivers be great with Kirk Cousins. It's not just obviously Justin Jefferson the last 2 years or 3 years, I should say. With him, but then Adam Thielen and JJ back in 2020, they were wide receiver 7 and wide receiver 9, and then Stephon Diggs in 2019 the worst year, I guess, for a wide receiver with Kirk Cousins, but it was still wide receiver 25. And then in 2018, you had Adam Thielen as wide receiver 8 with Stephon Diggs, also as wide receiver 14 with Kirk Cousins. Like, he knows how to support his playmakers
Yeah,
as really good fantasy guys. So let me ask you, we just talked about Chris Olave in the first segment. Drake London or Chris Olave?
that's a good question. I might have to keep weighing that as I get closer to season. If Cousins is healthy, I mean, if you say Cousins and Carr, who's the better quarterback in the better passing offense? I would say it's Cousins. So we'll see. And what I like about it is Cousins is also going to be in a familiar offense to him, where Derek Carr is adjusting. Keep that in mind. Get to another new offense that they're breaking in New Orleans.
Yeah, I think I might lean Drake London. It's so close.
Yeah,
It's close. I think that that's saying we're
he's a
high in
better
Drake London,
value
right?
for now.
Because
Yeah.
we like Chris Olave, so that's saying we're high in Drake London this year. I think we'd both go Drake London over Devontae Adams.
Oh yeah.
Accurate. And
He could be the next guy like that. So yeah,
and
I'm
then
looking for
Drake
youth.
London or Brandon Ayuk.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think I would still. Oh man, I think I would go Brandon Ayuk just because of the offense and his role in it. So because I think Debo's fading a little bit, so that's where I'm going there.
So another wide receiver gets a new quarterback, George Pickens. He's going to be playing
Yeah,
with Russell Wilson. We assume, right? I guess unless he stinks, and then maybe Justin Fields. But we got to assume it's going to be Russell Wilson this year. Last year, George Pickens had massive plays, right? He's a playmaker where every time he catches that ball, you're like, oh my goodness, like
right.
amazing. But at the same time, he really struggles with separation. And that's why he has those huge, contested catches that he has to come down with. He averaged just 2.3 yards of separation per target last year. That ranked third lowest among wide receivers with 75 targets last season. Now he gets Russell Wilson, who since 2018, he leads the NFL in passing touchdowns on tight window throws, averages the most air yards per attempt on tight window throws, and has the second best passer rating on tight window throws, only behind Aaron Rodgers. A tight window throw is less than 1 yard of separation. So this could not be a more perfect quarterback to go with George Pickens. Russell Wilson's going to throw it to Pickens, right? And he's going to trust him to make these plays. But how much more do you see him being like a target hog, or he's just going to have to get a lot done on like 120 targets?
Yeah, when you look at it, I mean, we have the offense that didn't really help Drake London, but then again, we didn't have the caliber of quarterback with Russell Wilson. Keep in mind, AJ Brown was pretty good in producing in the Arthur Smith offense. So you can get good wide receiver play. So that's one thing. And then you look at Pickens, I mean, he's going to get a lot of targets, I think. The volume is still going to be there. They didn't really go nuts upgrading the receiving core. They moved on from Deontay Johnson. Pickens wanted to be the alpha, and that was part of the battle between him and Johnson. So now he's the guy. They're going to give him a lot of targets downfield. And we know that Russell Wilson really fed DK Metcalf, that style of receiver. I think there's some similarities there where they're not maybe the greatest separators, but they use their size and speed to make a lot of plays. So I like that. And we know Mason Rudolph had a strong arm. Wilson has that strong arm. Not only does he have that, you mentioned tight window throws, but he can also keep plays alive. So he can wait for Pickens to kind of separate downfield and then fired off deep to him. So I love George Pickens. I just drafted him ahead of you, one pick
That hurt
in
so
our
bad.
Dynasty PPR Superflex League that we were doing. So I'm all into him. So look, I could be totally wrong on this one. The player could let me down, but I just look at the physical talent. And I think if he didn't have that knee injury at Georgia, you're talking about another guy that was the first round pick in this class. And then there'd be no question about Pickens' third year breakout.
Yeah, I don't think the talent between Drake London or George Pickens is all that different,
No.
right? So they're similar type of players. They're in a similar. I guess Kirk Cousins is a much better quarterback than Russell Wilson at this moment, but I don't even know if I want to say that, right?
Deep ball throws, I think they're about the same.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you're looking for, both of these guys, I think, a little bit more. But I think London might be a little bit more consistent, right? I think Pickens might blow up and have
Yeah.
higher ceiling, but he could also have a game where he has 6 catches for 43 yards.
What's nice is that we were talking about London only have two receiving touchdowns last year. Pickens only had 5, right? Led the team. But again, no one threw touchdowns on the Steelers. So Russell
Yeah.
Wilson is just like Kirk Cousins, typically throws a lot of touchdowns. Even in his terrible year last year, Russell Wilson had 26 passing touchdowns and got benched for no reason. But let me go through some guys quickly before we move on to our last segment. So George Pickens or T. Higgins?
Oh boy, Pickens. I'm just gonna lock it in. It's gonna probably be Pickens with every answer, but go ahead.
I'm going T. Higgins there. I love me some T. Higgins. Pickens or Amari Cooper?
Pickens. Sorry.
It's close. It's close.
Yeah.
I might go Amari Cooper, but it is close. Pickens or DK Metcalf?
Oh man, now you're getting tougher on me because they're kind of clones of each other. I think I have to go DK. Like I've seen a little bit more, so I trust him a little bit more, especially with Tyler Lockett fading and that new offense, and now in Seattle as well.
It's so funny. So I'm actually going Pickens on this one. So we're the exact opposite on all of them.
I want both of those guys on my team, by the way. Like I'm going to be targeting Metcalf and Pickens quite a bit. So
And you
if I
might
can
be
have
able to get
both
them
of them,
both because Metcalf's going a little bit earlier. So you could take Metcalf and then come back and
I
take
like the
Pickens.
big, tall, fast receivers. I know they're not as popular now as the little short guys in the slot. They're dominating, but I want these big guys. I'm a Randy Moss, Terrell Owens type of person. So if they're out there, I'm going to look for them.
They are way more fun to watch. In our next segment, we're going to talk about what in the world's going on with Jameson Williams. Like, it doesn't make any sense that he hasn't done anything in the NFL yet. Can he break out in his third year? And then you have guys like Treylon Burks and Jahan Dotson and Christian Watson who have been relatively pretty big busts in the NFL, right? Wan'Dale Robinson. Maybe Khalil Shakir is the best of this group. We'll hop into all of that right after our break. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you ever find that just as you're trying to fall asleep, your brain suddenly won't stop talking? Do your thoughts start racing right before bed or other inopportune moments? It turns out one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. Therapy gives you a place to do that so you can get out of your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. I know I've been in online therapy now for a few years. I never tried it before. I finally just jumped into it, and it's been an amazing, amazing experience. My therapist has helped me so much with just tactics on how to manage my anxiety and my irritability. And I don't know what I would do without it, honestly. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you don't have to, fret, right? If you don't like the therapist, you're able to change therapists without any questions. It's super easy. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Give online therapy a try at betterhelp.com/lockedon and get on your way to being your best self. So out of the guys I mentioned before ending our last segment there, Jameson Williams, Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, Christian Watson, Khalil Shakir, and Wan'Dale Robinson, if you had to put some money down on the one guy that has the highest ceiling that could break out fully in their third year, who would it be?
Yeah, the answer might surprise you a little bit. Maybe it's Jahan Dotson. And I really like this offense that I think Cliff Kingsbury is going to put in. And I think he's already said, we got to get the ball to Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. And they didn't do that consistently. I know Sam Howell had a better chemistry, it seemed like, with Dotson than McLaurin at one point. But he's got the most talent. He's the first round pick of this group, right? So he also has a ton of talent out of Penn State. I think they've underused him. I know Jane Daniels has a big arm, so that's great. That's one of his biggest strengths. Like he's not necessarily as consistent with the short to intermediate throws, but flick of a wrist, he can get the ball downfield, get those big plays. And I think the Commanders are just going to be better overall. They're going to spread the field out a little bit. I think you'll just see some things that we didn't see for the past few years, whether it was with Eric Bieniemy or Scott Turner. Just a lot more interesting concepts that are going to open things up here. So I do like that. I do like there's not a lot, right? I mean, Zach Ertz, how much is he going to do? Is he going to break down a little bit? It's nice to have him for Daniels, and you have Austin Eckler is nice to have, but I think the guys that they want to get involved are McLaurin and Dotson quite a bit. So I think Dotson has a chance here, especially if McLaurin gets some tougher coverage and you get it open and some opportunities to stretch the field. But I don't think it's even close. Some of these other guys, I mean, I just had to hear the Titans try to justify Treylon Burks' existence. Like, that's not good. Like, I mean, it's just not good. I mean, they have a new GM, so not the person who drafted him, so they could easily move on from that type of situation. So I don't think it's even close here. That I think I would go with Dotson. Everyone else, I mean, Watson maybe, Shakir maybe, but too many mouths to feed in those offenses.
The Dotson one, he definitely should be the wide receiver too. The second target
We
in this
loved him
offense.
last year, remember?
I know, that's what I'm scared of. I loved him last year. No,
Post-type
it
sleeper.
didn't make sense with the way they used him, right? In the preseason, it was working. In training camp, it was working. Like using him as a deep threat, using Sam Howell's deep arm, it looked like it was going to be a beautiful match. But then, I mean, the offensive line couldn't block for more than 2 seconds. That was a big deal. They had to get the ball out quickly, and Sam Howell was still holding on to it and wouldn't release it. I don't know. That was just a disaster last year. But the Commanders did lose 3 of their top 5 targets last season, and Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas, and Antonio Gibson. So yeah, you bring in Austin Eckler, and he might get 80 targets, but Antonio get. But what did I just say? They brought in Antonio Gibson. They brought in Austin Eckler. That's what they brought in
Same
Austin
type of
Eckler.
player.
Yeah, and he might get 80, 90 targets for sure. But Antonio Gibson himself got 60 targets last year. Brian Robinson Jr. got 43. Like Eckler's going to get all of Gibson's targets and probably steal of some of Robinson Jr.'s targets. So I don't think that really messes with the wide receivers all too much.
Curtis Samuel's gone too, so that helps.
Yeah,
So.
Curtis Samuel, 91 targets is gone. Logan Thomas with 78 targets. I'm sorry, Zach Ertz isn't getting 78 targets. He's he's not even going to make it through the year. And I like their addition of Luke McCaffrey, so we'll see what they do there. But yeah, Jahan Dotson should be a solid value. But let's talk about Jameson Williams because he's done nothing. He's done literally nothing. He had one good game last year, and it came in it came in the playoffs, right? And it's really just because of the rushing touchdown. He scored a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown. That's really the only thing that happened there. But I don't get it because he's playing in a great offensive system with Ben Johnson. He has Amon-Ra St. Brown that's taking away all the coverage. He's a speedster. He dominated at Alabama, like was so stinking good. And then he just can't do anything in the NFL with Jared Goff, who's a very solid quarterback, who's been able to support very good fantasy wide receivers. So what's going on with him?
I think there's a couple things at play. This is an inside-out type of passing game. I mean, when Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta are your main guys in the slot and tight end at this point, I mean, they were better. Why would they change it too much? This is the way they succeeded for most of the season, getting these guys involved, working the middle field. The other thing is they're a very good rushing offense, so they're not going to force it. And I think they're going to be a better team overall with defense. So maybe not just having to force it and chuck it here with Goff. And I don't know if that's Goff's strength anyway, right? Trying to get the ball downfield. I think it's working the middle of the field. We've seen it with Cooper Kupp and Tyler Higbee and going back to the Rams. He likes to work the middle of the field, go to the slot, go to the tight end. And they've had other guys to step up. I mean, maybe some of these departures will help, and they need to get the ball to Jameson Williams, but I don't think they need to force it. Don't forget, Jahmyr Gibbs is also a big part of the passing game as well. So it could be going through these 3 guys and then finding the occasional deep threat of Williams. So I think that's into play here. I think he just is not consistent as a playmaker. That's a problem, and they want consistency. I mean, you get St. Brown, Laporta, Gibbs. These guys are going to give you those plays all the time. So there's some upside there, but Goff, I think, limits it. And I think Williams himself is not proved to be a complete playing maker except a flashy guy at times.
Yeah, that one's boggling. I will say maybe one guy that we're overlooking is Khalil Shakir from the Bills, right? Yeah. He has opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 in targets in this offense. I know they drafted Keon Coleman right there in the first pick of the second round. They brought in Curtis Samuel, but Khalil Shakir is actually the one that led the Bills in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns once Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator. So from weeks 11 through the divisional round, it was Khalil Shakir who led the team in receiving yards. It wasn't Stephon Diggs. It wasn't Dalton Kincaid. It wasn't Gabe Davis. It was Khalil Shakir by a decent amount. And he tied for the most receiving touchdowns with James Cook there during that span. Now, I don't know. I don't think he has a high ceiling, right? But I do think if you play in a deep league where you need multiple flex or maybe a 3 wide receiver league and it's full PPR, he can be one of those guys that could consistently get you 10 to 14 points in a given week. He could be very much like a Cole Beasley a few years ago where he was very relevant for fantasy, especially in PPR leagues. So if you're in a deep league, you need to start 3 wide receivers. I think Khalil Shakir is a pretty solid pick late in drafts.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jameson Williams may be way overranked now around wide receiver 48. And then you have John Dotson 59, Christian Watson 45. You have Traylon Burks all the way to 83. And Khalil Shakir, I think, is really weirdly at wide receiver 61. He's a wide receiver 6. on a team that just lost all these targets. That
Where he
doesn't
could be
make
the wide receiver 1 on his team. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think what you're going to see is how do the targets play out between Coleman, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, James Cook, and what you get with Shakir. So can he cut in and get that value? Can he be that? And don't forget about, I guess, the annoying Curtis Samuel. We talked about him again, but we know he can cut into Shakir's value. So I think that's also at play. Can he fight through to be a key target here? Can he be the guy over Coleman? Now, I think he has a wide range of outcomes. Key fantasy phrase right there. But right now, you got to just go a little bit tepid with him, right, until we see a little bit more.
And I think we have very little hope for Wan'Dale Robinson or Christian Watson, right? Both guys struggled to stay healthy. The Giants added Malik Neighbors and Allen Robinson actually yesterday as well. They added Jalen Hyatt in the draft last year too. Wan'Dale Robinson maybe gets the Saquon Barkley targets, the short targets, but he's going to need so many targets to matter. And then Christian Watson, he could be good. He could have best ball. I would maybe consider him super late in drafts because he'll have a couple games where he has 120 yards and maybe a touchdown, but I don't want to draft him in when I have to decide who to start, right? I don't ever want to put him into my starting lineup. It never feels good.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Now, I'm going to just throw out 2 more names, and I'm going to just throw out 2 random names. For the last pick in your draft, you tell me which one you want if you're going there. Jalen Tolbert and Calvin Austin III.
Oh, easily Jalen Tolbert. It's not even a question for me. Jalen Tolbert. I don't expect Calvin Austin to be anything whatsoever.
No, he might be done. Yeah, he's actually 4th on the depth chart behind Van Jefferson and Roman Wilson right now, so that's not good. But Tolbert is sneaky. If they don't sign anyone else, they need somebody with Brandon Cooks and CeeDee Lamb. So Tolbert has teased before. So I
loved Tolbert coming out of school too. I absolutely loved him.
So there's a name. That's a name to have in any dart throw, best ball, last round, trying to find a name, deep leagues. That's a name I would just consider. Just keep it in mind.
Love that you brought that up. Yes. Last pick in a best ball league, take Jalen Tolbert. I love that. That is it for today's show. And that's it for our shows this week. So thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Everydayers. Vinny and I will be back on Monday. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Bye, y'all.